Welcome back, or welcome to Grateful and Full of Greatness. I'm your host, Mark Glicini. On this podcast, I sit down with guests who, in my opinion, live their lives with the pursuit of greatness in mind. This platform allows me to discuss and to explain strategies that go into reaching peak performance. This is episode 13. My guest, Andrew Baxter, head men's lacrosse coach at Fairfield University. Coach Baxter has been leading student athletes at the collegiate level for roughly 2 decades. He was the defensive coordinator at Yale for 6 years, starting in 2013 when I was a freshman at Yale. He played an integral role in my transition from offense to short stick defensive midfield. He has won multiple championships, including the 2018 Division I NCAA National Championship at Yale. Prior to Fairfield and Yale, Andrew Baxter coached at Ohio State, Drexel, and Colgate University. Not only is he one of the best coaches I've ever had and come across, his energy, enthusiasm, and perspectives are contagious and uplifting. I'm extremely excited to have him join me on here today. Coach Bax, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, buddy. Really appreciate it, man. You're too kind. You said it was going to be kind, but it's too kind, man.
So first and foremost, in regards to Grateful, I want to thank you for the Christmas cards. Yours of Marika and the 2 princesses is one of the very few I receive every year, so I'm really grateful for that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We'll keep them coming, no doubt.
I want to start where your coaching started for you. Who and what were some major influences as to why you got into coaching almost 20 years ago?
Yeah, man. So coming out of high school, my old man was like, you're going to a state school. And I said, okay, that's fair. So I started out at Potsdam State in upstate New York and, had a good lacrosse experience for a couple years there, but just wasn't getting the academic, rigor and getting pushed that I felt like I needed. So what I did was I decided to transfer to Springfield College in Western Mass, knowing that I wanted to do something in sports. And that was it is one of the greatest, schools for physical education and coaching there is. So I wanted to pursue that after a few years of not getting what I wanted. And so that's kind of where it started with my itch for coaching. And I wasn't sure. I'd grown up playing a lot of soccer and started playing lacrosse in 8th grade. And obviously played lacrosse in high school and college, and then kind of as I matured at Springfield, really developed that itch to coach lacrosse, and I got super lucky when I graduated from Springfield. Got an opportunity with Jim Nagel at Colgate mid-year actually, which is kind of crazy. So like I finished up my fall semester of student teaching at Springfield, and then got an opportunity in the winter at Colgate and came on and as a fresh graduate and just started from there, man. And that's kind of where things got going. And then I had, obviously I've had incredible mentors along the way. Like it's unbelievable. Like I think, sometimes you're in the moment, you take it for granted, but like I started out with Jim Nagel at Colgate, who's still a great friend of mine, great coach. Then I moved on from there to Drexel with Chris Bates, who is an incredible man and was also a great mentor. And then I was at Ohio State with Nick Myers. Him and I played together at Springfield and had a great relationship. And then obviously Andy Shea at Yale. So all those guys have had an incredible impact on my coaching style and kind of my perspective on things. Not only in lacrosse, but with family and life and all that stuff. So I've just been super lucky, man. But that's kind of where things started for me.
I love it. I think first thing that comes to mind is in playing for the San Diego Seals and under Coach Ben Ives, he always says, be a hunter-gatherer of information rather than affirmation. And something that I hold true really close to my heart is the power of mentors like you in my life and like many others that I've actually hunted to go get information from rather than search for affirmation. But you've had such a long journey of consistent success as a coach. But I'm sure there's been a roller coaster of highs and lows. What are some of those big moments or experiences that stand out to you?
Yeah, totally. So I had probably the biggest one was when I was at Ohio State, kind of a few years into my career, and I kind of was at a crossroads of not knowing whether I wanted to continue on coaching, because college coaching for people that may not know is pretty grueling, man. I mean, there's a lot of time away from, your family or your significant others, and whether that's, in the season traveling or that's in the summer, there's a lot of time away that people don't see, that you're on the road recruiting, and it takes a toll. And so I had my MO as a young coach was I was a guy that I was always on the road. So at this point, I had probably done, let's say, 12 years or so of, a lot of time on the road, and it was catching up with me a little bit. And I was kind of at a crossroads, and I wasn't sure if I was completely burnt out of coaching, or just the travel, or what it was. And so, I had some long talks with my wife, and decided that stepping away from lacrosse was going to be in the best interest of my mental health and family at the time. We'd started a family out there. So I actually ended up quitting my job at Ohio State, and didn't know if I wanted to stay in coaching or get out of coaching. Part of that was, I think, maybe being away, in the Midwest, away from kind of both of our families. But that was definitely a decision that it was tough, man. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I applied to Whole Foods. I applied to some Starbucks places. We were going to live with my wife's aunt next door to where her parents grew up, and kind of just reassess things from a mental health perspective. And then a few weeks after I had quit, I was grateful I got to spend a summer, because Marika was finishing up. My wife was finishing up her job at Ohio State before we were going to move. And so I had about a month and a half with my daughter, my oldest at the time, when she was real little. And we just had the whole, every day together, we just got to spend, and it was cool. I strapped her on the bike, and we rode around Columbus for like a month and a half and just explored. And, so that was cool. And then, but we didn't know what we were going to do. So I was going to either work at Whole Foods or Starbucks or something, just to kind of, hit a hard reset. So, I don't want to say that was a low. That was just a crossroads, and one of the things I like to say, Mark, and you've probably heard me say this before, is everything happens for a reason, right? So like, I'm a firm believer in that. I think, things come your way for a reason, so, that reason just happened to be I needed to hit a hard reset with my mental health and get back on track with things. So I was lucky. Coach Shea called me a couple weeks after I had resigned from Ohio State, and was like, hey, Bax, I'd really like to talk to you about the position here. And I told him what I was going through and that kind of thing. And he was real sensitive to that. And we both sat on it for a few days and thought about it. And then I went and visited with him, spent some time with him, and decided that after talking with my wife, and that it would be in the best interest of the family to get back into things and see where it went. So that's kind of one of the stories that not a lot of people know, I don't think. I've shared it a few times now, since doing a couple of these podcasts and things like that. But that was definitely a crossroads in my life that was happened for a reason,
I love it. And something I've always admired about you, Coach Bax, is your vulnerability. I think it's the reason why when I was a young freshman, I trusted you so much, because I just felt, you didn't even say anything. It was just, I just felt that I could trust you, and whatever you had to say is what I wanted to pick up and learn from. And thanks for sharing that story. Two things that come to mind is every breakdown leads to a breakthrough, and every setback is the setup for a comeback, right? And that's exactly what you're talking about. But it's such a big time commitment, right? And the things that we love, there's such a big time commitment for. And when you're a Division I coach, you have the student athlete check-ins, the practices, the games, and then the recruiting on the outside of the year, which is probably the most enduring thing that you have to go through, because you're away from your family when you could be going to the beach with them or something like that. So what are some strategies that you do use now to kind of maintain that balance as a father, friend, and then a person outside of administration and lacrosse?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I've actually, since that happened, I've always been looking for tools to kind of help me with that. And probably one of the greatest things that that I've been doing as recently has been I've been meeting with a psychotherapist and a meditation I guess coach, if you will, and kind of, it's like, I know you work with Brian Kane a lot. I speak with Brian Kane every 2 weeks as well. He's been a mentor and friend of mine as well. He's helped me with some of this as well. But I think, you need to, and what I've learned, I think, is that you need to take care of yourself first in order to take care of your units, if you will. So meaning, for me, it's my family and my team, and the Fairfield Lacrosse program, my coaching staff. I have a few close units that I need to attend to as well, but you really need to take care of yourself first and foremost, and I think that's something I've learned through some of those mental crossroads. I've had some physical crossroads as well with being a diabetic. And so I think I've learned a lot and trying to manage those and take care of yourself first and foremost so that you can take care of others. And for me, that was really hard to do, because I have a hard time putting myself first a lot of times. But it feels selfish, but it's really not if you think about it, because you got to take care of yourself in order to take care of others. So, it's a decision you have to make in order to really take care of the people that mean the most to you or that are closest to you, So, that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned.
Yeah, I love it, because the thing that gets lost is that leaders like yourself are great followers. They're not afraid to ask for help where they need it. And the word that comes to mind is interdependence rather than dependence or being self-reliant and independent. You can be better for others. You can be more compassionate to other people if you're compassionate to yourself first. So I love what you're putting down there, because you don't have to have every single thing in order to be a great leader, right? And especially in your weak points, you got to be able to ask for help. I think that is a true sign of a leader, is where I'm weak, I will need help, but where I'm good, I'm going to be great. And I love that. And to change the tide of the conversation a little bit, and you getting back into coaching, more of a fun question is, do you have a favorite part of practice, a favorite part of the season, or a favorite part of the year as a lacrosse coach now that you're back in it?
Yeah, absolutely. We and we didn't get, obviously, for a number of reasons this year, we didn't get to do as much of it, obviously with the pandemic, but then also the way that we had to structure this year, particularly at Fairfield with being a new coaching staff and that kind of thing. But I think my favorite time of the year is kind of what we call that individual period, where we have like the smaller groups and we get to work on the minute, details that are associated, positionally and or with your unit and stuff. And I think that's the time where the real coaching kind of happens, in my opinion, where you're developing guys physically in terms of you're watching every rep that they're taking, and you're critiquing them and you're letting them make mistakes at the same time. But then, the personal side of things too, where you get to really spend some quality time with the guys in your team on a smaller group basis. And I think that's where, like you said, that trust, you get to build some of that trust and
I love that.
So I think that's probably my favorite time.
And to pull on that thread a little bit more, like each new year, obviously this pandemic got in the way of your first year here at Fairfield, but each new year is like a combination of rebuilding and reloading. And do you have any strategies that you use on that small individual group basis or as a team to make that process of rebuilding and reloading as smooth as possible?
I mean, one of the things I like to do is I try to have a macro structure to the thing, and then a micro structure to to the way things are viewed, right? So obviously the macro would be your kind of, what you want, your product to look like, I guess, if you will, your offense or your defense or your program, your culture, whatever it might be. And then on the micro level, it's kind of like, all right, well, the way I look at it is like, if I have an individual with, let's say six defensemen, let's just say, I want to spend 30% of that time doing stick work. I want to spend 30% of that time doing footwork. And then I want to spend 30% of that time doing, team skills, if you will, or communication and, or things that are specific to their to their unit. So,
sure.
I try to break it up like that a little bit and at least have a thought. And obviously that's very fluid at times. So I don't necessarily look at it as like a reloading or rebuilding, I guess, as much as kind of the overall development piece, I think is always something that's crucial to any program. I think, and I know Coach Shea talked about this on your podcast a couple weeks ago, Mark, where he was talking about, the individual development piece and just trying to get a little bit better every day. And I think, that's kind of the way I view it as well, where it's like, I don't necessarily think it's a reloading or rebuilding as much as it is just an overall development.
Yeah, I love that. You could either take a worm's eye view or a bird's eye view of what's going on, right? If we're talking from a negative connotation, the problem looks massive if you're taking a worm's eye view. But if you take a bird's eye view, and I love how you have that shift from macro and micro, and something that I've heard in the past is be slow on the macro, but be speedy on the micro, right? Like you're going from 30% of stick work, 30% of footwork, and then you're going to the communication and group things, right? And you're moving at a very fast pace day to day. But it's a journey from the macro perspective. So I really like that idea that you gave us. And something that I want to go deeper into is, even before I knew you were running top defenses over and over and over. And something that I'm obsessed with is the idea that professionals and peak performers understand the idea that it's harder to stay than become, right? And I'm really infatuated by those that like the Tom Brady's of the world that have not only just found the top, but stayed at the top. What do you think are some of the things that you point to that allowed you to run top defenses over and over and over again with different groups?
Yeah, absolutely. That's an incredible question. I think the biggest thing is getting them to understand that the things that they can control are ultimately the most important things. So if you look at specifically defense for lacrosse or defense for any sport, right? The things that you can control are your hustle, your effort, your energy, your communication, you have to have thick skin, obviously, because you're going to get scored on. You have to have a hard, you have to be tough mentally in order to turn the page on things, So I think those things I like to speak to the defense every year, multiple times about this. I stopped practice to talk to them about this. I said, like, if we can't do these things, or you guys aren't doing these things, like, it doesn't matter what we're running. So it's always more about the how than it is the what. You know what I'm saying?
Love that.
So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we run this intricate defense. If we're not doing these other things that you guys can control, and everyone can do these things, that's the beauty of it, And I think the other thing with that is I talked to the defense about, I said, like, perfection would be nice. It'd be great. It'd be awesome if the defense looked like this at all times. That'd be incredible. But that's never going to happen. And I think you have to be realistic, especially as an assistant. It was hard for me to not try and get as perfect as possible. But I think, like, you got to let go of some of that. You have to have some imperfections in order to be perfect. Maybe I don't know. Slogan with it, but
I want to stay there, because that is all the mental game is to me. Like when I wake up in the morning and I chase the mental game and getting better at it, one of the quotes that always sticks in my mind is the probability of the outcome we want increases when you let go of the need to have it. So what that means is, if you're a student, you got to stop focusing on getting A's and focus on learning. Right? If your focus is on learning, then you will get the A's. But if your focus is on getting A's, then the byproduct is stress. And when it comes to being a competitor on the lacrosse field, if your focus is on winning, then the byproduct is stress. But if your focus is on effort, something you can control, like you talked about, then the byproduct is most likely going to be winning at the end of the day, right? So it's this fragile dance that I talk about, because you shouldn't be careless, but you have to care less about the things that are not within your control, right? Bad information or bad advice is keep your eyes on the prize, right? If you keep your eyes on the prize, you might fall in a ditch that's one foot away from you, right? Because you're looking too much into the horizon. And then peak performance is present moment to present moment to present moment that leads to momentum, right? And I love what you said there about the how over the what. And something that I want to throw back at you is you've made that transition from running top defenses year after year to now taking the helm. And what kind of changes have you seen as you've made that transition yourself from defensive coordinator to now at the helm?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think that's going back to that, the how over the what is kind of where I've premised that move from assistant to head coach too, because I had to focus on a lot of the how we were doing things, So like if, for instance, looking at a practice plan or a practice, it's like, all right, well, I hired good assistants so that they can handle a lot of the what. I need to know how we're moving from drill to drill, how fast practice is going, and how we're doing certain things so that I can assist them better, so I can be their assistant when I need to. You know what I mean?
I love that.
Hey, how are we teaching this so that I can help you with it?
Right.
Like, I don't care what it is, but let's just let me know how we're doing it so that when you're doing that drill or you're coaching this kid on how to shoot or how to pass or how to catch, like I can help you with that. And I think, that's the micro level of that. And then the macro level is, all right, well, how fast are we running from drill to drill? How are we coming out on the field? How does the first 15 minutes of practice look? How does it feel? Like, I think that's a big thing too. I think, like, one thing I noticed this year going from assistant to head was how practice was feeling. It's like you have a sense of that as an assistant, but you're so into, what, where guys are moving and what how they scored that goal or the intricacies of guys being in the right spot in the clear, whatever it might be, that sometimes you lose track of the overall feel of practice. And I remember this year going out to practice, I'm like, this either feels great or, hey, I'm not getting a great vibe today for whatever reason, So it's like, okay. And having that, I think, sense or emotional intelligence about what your team is feeling is like so big too, and I think that's the biggest thing I've noticed going from assistant to head, where it's like I got to kind of manage that more, and have a sense of that.
It's so cool, man. And I two things that come to mind are Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, and thin slicing and making snap judgments. And really, over your 20 years of coaching, by you gathering all that information, it allows you to blink and make a snap judgment based on how you feel because of the prior experience. And then if you're checking the pulse of yourself, you're checking how you're doing health-wise. But if you have a finger on the pulse of what's going on as the team, then you know how to adjust it to keep the health of the team alive, which I really love what you're giving there. Totally. Where does that come to mind about you, Bax, or empathy and authenticity right away? I think they're cornerstones when I think of you. If somebody was to describe Andrew Baxter, is there anything you do specifically to uphold that kind of caring and genuine side of you? Or is there anyone that's helped instill that in you, that kind of empathy and authenticity?
Tough to say about influences there. I'm not sure where I get that from. I just obviously probably my parents and the mentors that I've been around. I think just been being yourself. You can't be anyone else. So be yourself and I think going back to a couple of things, like I think just everything happens for a reason, and then trust in your gut. My wife and I we had a long conversation about that the other day, where it's like, your gut is telling you something for a reason, right? And like, so a lot of people I think don't have a tendency not to listen to their bodies. And it's like, I've been doing a lot of work with that and how you connect your mind and your body, where it's like, okay, so your body can tell your mind things as well. Not a lot of people realize that, I think. And so, like, I think trust in your gut a lot of times, and it might do you wrong every once in a while. It probably makes a bad decision every once in a while, but for the most part, I've lived my life by trusting my gut. And I think, you get that feeling, you get those butterflies and you get that thing, and that's good. It's like, funny, a quick little funny story that I think you'll appreciate. So I was coaching third grade girls basketball this year, Fairfield Youth. And so I was like, I was one of like the assistants. I was just helping out, and I kind of took a quiet seat on the bench and was just helping girls and helping the guys, like, substituting that during the games. And and there was this girl, Kayla, and she was on my daughter's team, and she's sitting there, and I said, Kayla, are you ready to go in the game? Because substitution was coming up. She goes, I don't think I want to go in. She's like, I'm not sure I want to go in. I said, you're probably, and I told my team this story too after this happened, but I said, are you nervous? She goes, yeah, my stomach, is feeling a little weird. I said, oh my gosh. I said, that's great. I said, you know what that means when you get that feeling in your stomach? I said, you must like basketball a lot, because you know what? I said, if your stomach's doing that, that means it's telling you like basketball a lot and you care about what's going on out there.
Right.
I said, so when you get out there, you're going to be great.
I love that.
She got right in the game.
That is so powerful. Is so powerful.
And I pumped her up, and I told my team that this year before our first game. I said, you know what, guys? I said, I'm real nervous. I said, I got butterflies. I got all this stuff going on. I said, I'm sure you guys have some of that too, And I said, that's a good feeling, because you know what that means? It means we care. It means we're starting to care about things, and it's okay. You know, so going back to trusting your gut, I think that's something that I think has led to kind of the just trying to live life by being yourself. I don't know.
Coach, I really love that story, because I think more and more, because of the hyper competitiveness that's happening here in America, there's parents or coaches that might have handled that situation with, what do you mean you don't want to go in the game, right? And you just handled it so powerfully by you being vulnerable yourself. I came back to it. I don't know if you read the book Dare to Lead, but you're all over it, man. You're so vulnerable in the fact that you're connecting right there with a third grade girl. There's a book called 10% Happier, and it was written by a news reporter who was having anxiety attacks when the lights were on, right? And the punchline of it is mindfulness. And it's a buzzword that gets thrown around, but what is mindfulness? And it's becoming completely present. And Dr. Rob Gilbert, who's my main mentor, talks about if you have trouble meditating and becoming mindful, then you need it the most, right? And it's this cool thing that if you want to be able to perform when the pressure's on and you feel that nervous energy, you got to be able to be completely calm when you should too. So it's opposite ends of the spectrum in which you're ready to go versus trusting your gut and being completely mindful and listening to your body, like you talked about before. And I would even encourage you to listen to your mind, your soul, your emotion, and then what's your thought life in that. And that's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. So on top of empathy and authenticity and being yourself, as a coach, as a parent, as a friend, what are some character traits that you look for in your players, in your student athletes, and other people that you recruit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing we worked hardest at this year with the team, and something that we're looking for in recruits is and Coach Shea talked a little bit about this too, I think, from the recruiting piece, is just that, the care and the love for the game. I think our core principles this year, Fairfield Lacrosse, were selfless commitment and relentless effort, right? So if you look at the selfless commitment piece, the reason I chose that as one of our core principles, or something that I believe in wholeheartedly, is I think, once you feel like you're committed to something kind of outside of yourself, that's when you have a championship culture, or you have an elite mindset. If you have an overall belief, and I think, that starts with individual guys and trying to break them down to not be, I don't know. I had some conversations with some of the guys on my team this year. I said, there's a difference between egotistical and egocentric, right? It's like, egocentric is you're kind of just, you think about yourself maybe before others. Egotistical, you have an aura of arrogance, So I think trying to be, we try to define selfless this year, using that of saying, hey, selfless means you think of others first. You think of the team out before yourself. You think of, you try to do things that are positive contributions to the program and to your teammates, So I think that's kind of where we start with that, and that's what we spent a lot of time with this year, Mark. Working on kind of what that means and how it feels, and having conversations with the team and guys about that. And I think that's kind of where we spend a lot of our energy, like I said.
And that's a path that is a growth mindset, and it is something that can be trained, right? This is not something that's you're born with or gifted, or like you're not born with humility in the same way you're not born a doctor, right? And you can train that. And I love that is like a main principle in the locker room and in the rooms that you speak about, because if you have causes greater than self, you can do greater things. And I think that's a common misconception that people are looking external at the wrong times, whether it be social media or the news. And it's time to be external when you have yourself in order, right? Like that kind of interdependence that we were talking about earlier. I mean, this right here keeps intertwining this idea that it's important to self-discover yourself, but then also do something for causes greater than self. And there's this kind of, you're not in a silo, right? You're not by yourself, and everything at the end of the day comes down to relationships. When I was last podcast with Dr. Christina Bersari, she talks about no one has ever gotten to their final days and said, I wish I worked more. They talk about, I wish I did this with my relationships more. And I think that if you can have that selfless commitment and relentless effort, you're onto something special, because those are very controllable and very trainable, right? So I love that. So many of the guests that I've had on offered sources of inspiration. You brought up the work you've done with Andy Shea and building Yale, but they also turn to these other sources of inspiration and resources that cultivate their philosophies and their perspectives. Are there any resources that you always go back to, or things that you have on your desk there, or people that you use, or mantras, or anything that you turn to for sources of inspiration?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm looking around my office right now. I got like, it's funny actually. Before we're getting on, I was looking around my office. I got 4 things posted actually right here. So I got actually this note is pretty cool. It's a Post-it note from my first year of coaching 20 years ago.
Love it.
and so these are my notes when I was we were in a staff meeting, Coach Nagel, and it was just my Coach Nagel and myself, and we were talking about the team and the program, and the first one is coachability and listening. I don't even know if coachability is a word, but coachability and listening. And these were 3 things that he felt were the most important to team success or cultural success, right? So it's coachability, listening, conditioning, toughness, mental and physical. You know. So I've had this thing for 20 years, man. This thing ain't sticking anywhere, you know. But
it's not as sticky anymore. It's not a
sticky note anymore.
and which one of those 3 would you really say matters to you the most, right? Because I think they fit into each other again. But which one do you really like?
Absolutely. You know, I think coachability, listening, and then toughness are kind of, to me, those are 2 of the more important ones. You know, I think the conditioning piece to me is very important, but it's almost in a separate category, if you will. But I think the toughness piece, obviously, and I think, you know, it's funny. I wrote down literally I had toughness, mental, and physical, and it's like I had no idea what mental toughness was 20 years ago when I was 22 years old. And now that I've done a lot of work with yourself and Brian Kane and I've kind of really been able to define what mental toughness is through coaching, and I think that's obviously the big piece, and I think something we introduced to our team at Fairfield this year. There was something that we did a lot when you were at Yale and the Yale program does, but I think working on that mental toughness, and like you were talking about, it can be trained. So we worked really hard at that this year. So that might be the number one for me. But
I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of the other things I got here, like this is a good one I've always had that says players tend to become what they believe you think they are. So I think that's a good one. I think it's something that I think I really honed in when I was at Yale, and Coach Shea shed a lot of light on this to me, where his philosophy has always been, and he talked a little bit about this on your podcast, where coaching those guys that are quote unquote at the bottom of your roster, maybe talent wise, is just is more important than coaching the guys that have the talent, because the guys that have the talent, they don't necessarily need all that much coaching. They need some direction, but you want to let them play, So I think like coaching those guys and working on developing that overall team culture and becoming a team, those guys, they'll become what you believe you think they are.
Yeah.
So if you think that the 50th guy on your roster is just as good as your number one attackman, he might develop to be, a really good attackman. If you think he's a bench warmer and he's a scrub and he doesn't deserve to be on the team, then he's never going to get better, and he's never going to help you.
There's multiple things we're touching on here, and one being the mentor, the power of mentors again, right? Because what you say matters, right? If especially if you're the leader of a group, because if they start to believe that you don't believe in them, then that could carry with them for a very, very long time. I was speaking to Anson Dorrance at UNC. Arguably one of the most winning coaches of all time. And I'm going on the thread in which you talked about direction versus coaching. And he said an amazing quote, and he was backed up by something else after. But the quote was, average players want to be left alone, good players want to be coached, and great players want the truth, right? And the reason why that is the case is because Anson said that coaching is just another form of criticism, right? You're critiquing something in some way, right? And I like the thing that you talked about versus direction versus coaching, because he said that Mia Hamm had the highest amount of self-doubt that he's ever seen. And if he was to coach her, he might have crushed her career. But rather, he gave her guidance, right, and allowed her to see the truth. You did this at practice today. This is your trajectory, right? This is the truth. And I really love what you were touching on there, that you have this idea of direction. And I think that something that goes unnoticed about your belief, because I felt it firsthand as being a player underneath you, and I believed in myself because you believed in me, especially during that transition to becoming a short stick defensive midfielder. The importance of leaders and teachers having this balance between serious and funny, right? Not just serious all the time and not sarcastic to no end, but you do that as well as any coach I've ever seen. So how do you maintain that balance? When do you know when to turn it off and turn it on?
Yeah, it's one of those things you trust your gut, I guess, right? I don't know. That's I think, it's funny. It's like, the first team meeting we had this year at Fairfield, the first thing that came out of my mouth, I said, guess what, guys? This is going to be really hard. I said, but we're going to have a lot of fun, And it's funny, I said that, and that was just, I just said that because I probably would have said that even if I hadn't written it down or whatever. And it's funny, a lot of guys in end of the year meetings and meetings throughout the year have come back and been like, Coach, remember when you said that? And I was like, no, but yes, they were like, you know what? This was really hard, but we're having a blast. I'm like, yes, this is exactly it. I said, we're playing lacrosse, man. It should be fun. It's got to be fun. You got to show up to practice and want to be there and want to have fun and want to be with your teammates. At the same time, want to be coached and be the best version of yourself. You know what I'm saying? That's it, man. That is it. So we had, I think you gotta walk that line, right? It's okay. It's we had, it's funny. And again, going back to the how we're doing things in practice, it's okay, yeah, we got music going at the beginning of practice and it's lighter and this and that. And that's how I think you can keep some balance. You do some things like that. But if it's light and the guys aren't working or they're not into it, then, you gotta stop the music and be like, all right, well, we're gonna practice with no music, and I'm gonna yell at you till you guys figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you got to teach. You have to show them how it looks to work hard and have fun at the same time.
I love that.
That's hard, and that's tough. That's tough, but
very tough.
But definitely possible. And I think the best teams have that balance. Where it's hey, they enjoy being around each other, they enjoy practice. And they work their butt off, they get their practices. They don't realize that it was, the best teams we had at Yale. When you were there, it's it didn't feel like 2 hours. Some days I get done with practice, practice is over. It's that's it, it's 2.5 hours later. You're gee.
Yeah.
And I think that's it, man. I think
and your word carries more emphasis when you do that switch back and forth, right? You're having fun. It's all good. I was talking to Brian Kane on his podcast two days ago, and he made a great point that does the umpire at the start of a baseball game say play ball or work ball, right? He says play ball, right? Because it should be fun, right? There should be fun inside of it. My favorite motivational video on YouTube is 6 minutes and 21 seconds long by Lou Holtz. It's a commencement speech in which he's literally saying a joke and then delivering a serious point, saying a joke, delivering a serious point. And he has your attention like a comedian, and then he drives something home like a commencement speaker should, right? I really just love that, because now he's pulling on your heartstrings and you're not just a student anymore. You're entertained, right? And if you can have that balance of education and entertainment, you're onto something special.
Totally. And it goes back to like the, like if you just sit up there and you're barking orders, they're not listening. They might be hearing some stuff coming out of your mouth, but they're not listening. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you got to get their attention, and then whether that's a joke or so sometimes it's a joke, right? Sometimes it's a you screaming in their face, and then you got snot bubbles coming out of your mouth because you need to do that. And we had to do that this year too. A couple of our games. Where we went down 5-0. We went down 5-0 in two of our games this year.
I'll tell you a funny story. When Brian Keane led me to go meet Dr. Rob Gilbert, and I'm sitting in on his graduate course, 3 hours long, right? I sit down, and it's the first night. I'm there with people twice my age, and I'm sitting in the center getting ready for class, and Dr. Gilbert starts the class like this. Well, I've been teaching here for 40 years, and we're going to go over applied sports psychology, and then he just bangs the podium, and he goes, after a minute or two of talking monotone, and he goes, how many of you could stand me speaking like that for this long? I want you to crumple up a piece of paper, put it at the end of your desk, and if I ever am boring you, you throw that piece of paper at me, right? And it was the most electric class I've ever been a part of, because he says, it's my job as the teacher to keep your attention. It's not yours, right? So if I do a bad job here and I don't keep you entertained, that's my fault, not yours. And I love that, because
I love it.
That is the premise of where education should be, right? Like a teacher teaching like a coach would, right? And keeping them up. And if you're ever in a Dr. Rob Gilbert class or seminar, he's got you doing games, watching videos, right? Moving around, because actions change your attitude, movements change your moods, and motions change your emotions, right? So I really love where he gets with that, because that's the way to teach.
I love it. It's incredible. And that's, I think, going back to your earlier question about going from assistant to head coach, that's another thing that I think, some of it came natural, and some of it was I had to learn throughout this year, and I'm still learning, obviously, but in terms of taking stories and or like we were talking about jokes, but like stories a lot of times being like, hey guys, like that story about third grade basketball or whatever. It's like, all right, that story, right, gives some color to the point that I'm trying to make. Mm-hmm. So now they're actually listening, and they're not just like hearing you talk, so like. So true. Like half the great stories I listen to, I go, is that true, Dr. Gilbert? And he'll be like, does it matter? Because it doesn't matter. That's right. Does it matter? It's delivering a point that's thought-provoking, and then actually action-provoking, because it changes your perspective. So I want to go back. So in 2013, you and I are fresh and new. I was a freshman, and it was your first year at Yale. You inspired me. You pushed me. You helped me become a pretty good short-stick defensive midfielder, and I'm endlessly grateful for your guidance, right? But what memories come to mind, right? You touched on it a little bit earlier. You walking away from the game or thinking about it after Ohio State, having some serious conversations with Marika. But what kind of memories come back to mind on the comeback, right? Where you and I are starting off at Yale in 2013. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing I could think of is the amount of trust and confidence that Coach Shea showed in me. And I think him and I had known each other for quite a while before I got to Yale, because he was an assistant at UMass when I was actually finishing up my career at Springfield, and we had known each other through working camps and being in the geographical vicinity, and then being colleagues for a while. We had known each other for a long time, but I remember looking for some direction in terms of what he was looking for out of the defense. He's like, all right, well, you're going to run the defense and you're going to do a lot of the recruiting. I was like, all right, cool. And I remember trying to hound him I was like, Coach, can we meet about what you think we want to look like on defense, or talk about some of the terms we want to use and stuff? He hands me like he's like, oh, here's some terms we've used in the past. And like, that was it. I was like, okay, so I'll just run with this then, right? So I remember having, conversations with some of the older guys at the time, like Peter Johnson and Mike McCormick and those guys defensively. I had to bring them in and be like, hey guys, what are some of the things, that you guys liked that we're not, that I don't want to ruffle a change here, but here's some of my ideas that have worked in the past. And here's some of the things that I feel strongly about that I would really like to implement with our defense, and so we had to come to a compromise with some of the, whether it was a term or the way we wanted to slide or, the drills or man down or whatever it was. And I think, that I learned a lot in that year about, having giving your players and having them be involved. And I think, again, going back to one of the things I learned over the 7 years at Yale was probably, that was one of them in terms of having the guys have a voice in the team and being part of things. And so that was a huge step for me.
I mean, Coach, that's huge. I'm just sitting here shaking my head because when I speak to great coaches like yourself, they all do the same thing. They ask questions and they spark conversation, right? It's not a dictatorship. It's almost like, I always use this analogy, but you walked into Yale and you have a bunch of plants there. Would you ever just wipe out all the plants and say, no, this is what we're going to plant? No, you would find a way to foster the growth through asking questions, getting their opinion. And then, of course, there's those non-negotiables, right? Nowadays, I watch hours and hours of film and study opponents and my prior play. However, I didn't always, right? I would go into your office my freshman and senior year. Was like, I always say this, it was like going to the dentist. It was the worst. I actually hated it. But why were you so big into watching film? So although you did ask questions, right, you still had your non-negotiables, like me coming to your office to watch film. Why was that so important to you?
I think because, I played, to me, it was developing my career was relationships, number one. And then it was learning from those relationships, whether that was talking X's and O's with guys. I was always seeking information, like you talked about. And then I was able, I needed to watch film because I was a Division III player. I was a bad Division III player. But I had a passion for the game. And so for me, I needed to learn how the best were doing it, because I couldn't rely on experience to teach it necessarily. I played midfield in college. I wasn't even a defenseman. So I needed to learn, how some of the best people were doing it, how they were teaching it, what it looked like. And then I was able to develop my own philosophy on how I felt like, one, I felt comfortable coaching it. And then two, what players I was my philosophy's changed based on the players that I'm coaching too, which is, you have to adapt every year, right? Based on who you have and that kind of thing,
Sure.
So I think I was so passionate about the film because I saw the benefits of it from my perspective personally. And then I felt like it was something that was being, when I got to Yale, maybe was underutilized from an individual perspective, and I think it was a way for me to connect with you guys too.
That's true.
Bring in breakfast, bring in a cup of coffee. We'll watch a little film, whether we're just sitting there and watching it or we're critiquing it or whatever it might be.
It's really interesting because when it comes to performance and getting closer to higher performance and optimal performance, I don't care what you're talking about. You go from a stage of discipline to you cross the magic bridge to desire. And what does desire, discipline sound like? It's I got to and I have to, right? And then the stage of desire is I get to and I want to. And that was the complete 180 I made. Is my freshman and sophomore year. It was nothing against you, Coach. I just hated coming in to see you. I knew that I was going to get exposed. I didn't like it. I knew what play you were about to show me, and I got undressed, right? But it was so important, and I was so involved in the discipline stage. I hated it. I can't stress that enough. But then my senior year, I remember we were a few weeks into it, and we were number one in the nation my senior year, 10 games in, but about 4 games in, I remember taking the whole team in, and I said, listen, I hated it too. And this is my senior year. And I said, but there's nothing more important than going washing yourself and watching the other opponent, because to know yourself is not enough. You got to know the opponent, especially if you're on the defensive side of the ball. There's a lot of offensive guys that say it allows them to think too much, and I totally understand that. But from the defensive side of the ball, we talked about Blink and Malcolm Gladwell making snap judgments on how you feel practice is going. But even to this day, the reason why I'm so grateful for you is because when I have to go and do a long approach to an amazing offensive player in the Premier Lacrosse League, I have a snap judgment because I've been watching film against them. What do they like? What they don't like? So I don't want to push it too much, but I know it's a simple little factor. We're talking about film, right? It shouldn't be a big deal, but it is, right? Because I felt like the little victories that I was able to make from watching film has made a drastic impact on my overall growth. So thank you for that.
Totally. Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. I think that snap decision is probably the main reason why you would come in and watch film too, right? So you see it over and over. You're getting the physical reps. Now you're getting the mental reps too of being like visualizing that play again, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think you're right. I think it's huge.
When you're speaking to players, or perhaps it's even a lesson or two you want to instill in your daughters, Ray and Frankie, at home, what matters most to you in regards to their growth and how they should carry themselves? I know we talked about earlier that you want them to be relentlessly giving effort and selflessly committed. But when you're speaking to them, what kind of things come back to the forefront, right? You always are talking about to your players or to your daughters.
Totally, man. Well, my oldest wants to be an astronaut. So
love that.
I told her, let's do it.
Let's do it.
She won't take off her NASA shirt. She's got a NASA shirt she won't take off. It's unbelievable.
Well, I'll tell you what. Some great told me that players tend to become what you believe they think they are, right? So
That's right. So I think, it's funny actually. So I had an opportunity during the pandemic, probably maybe a month ago or so, to talk to the Coach Bugby asked me to speak to the Springfield College team, my alma mater.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it was one of the coolest experiences that I've had, and I put a lot of thought into that and kind of what I wanted to say, and I kept coming back to, all right, well, I need to share with these guys, I need to put myself in their shoes and share with these guys, some of the things that I learned maybe when I was right around their age, or that I've learned in the 20 years since I graduated that I wish I knew then. You know what I'm saying? And so the first thing I talked about was following your passion, and I think that takes courage, that takes vulnerability, that takes a lot of things, right? It takes having a passion, right? Which I think some people, maybe they don't have, but I do feel like people have inklings of what they like. People have they're like, oh, I like, whether it's art, music, sports, whatever. It's like, hey, if you like music, then go be around music and do music, man. Like, that's cool. Like, that's you. Be you. So I think, follow your passion. So my daughter wants to be an astronaut and she's into space. I love it. That's great. Do it. Let's go. The second thing I talked about, and we talked a lot about, was building connections and relationships. And I think that's one of the things that this pandemic, I think, has allowed a lot of people to do, I think, is to take a deep dive into their, close relationships, family, friends, that kind of thing. I've had a couple Zooms with some high school buddies that I hadn't talked to in, 10, 15 years, stuff like that. It's like, really, it's cool, man. We talked about that. And then taking notes, I think, is like you said, the smallest pencil is more powerful than the biggest brain. And I think that's something, I forget what the quote is, but they said once you stop learning, you're done, right? You never stop learning.
Absolutely.
And then saying please and thank you. That's something I talk to my daughters to all the time. That's one of our team rules. So those are two of our team rules here at Fairfield too. Everybody takes notes and everybody says please and thank you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's your, that goes right in line with your podcast here. I think just being grateful for everything you have, and I think that's something I try to instill in the players here and my daughters. And then the last thing is, don't be a jerk. Just don't be a jerk.
good.
It's so broad. It's so just, there's just a lot there, but it's like, at the end of the day, everybody, I feel like everybody knows right from wrong for the most part. And if you mess up and you do wrong, like that's okay too. You're going to learn from it, hopefully, so, but at the end of the day, like, don't be a jerk consistently.
Yeah. Well, I think you touched on it, and I love that those are your main points to your speech. But in terms of following your passion, something Doc Gilbert always talks to me about, and it goes hand in hand with staying curious, right? He always says, why is it that so many students grow up as question marks, but by the time they get to college, they're periods, right? They're not speaking, they're not engaging in class. They go from question marks to periods. And it's because they've had so many people that have told them no to their passion. And you should follow what we're talking about in this subject specifically. And you have to be well-rounded, don't be well-rounded, be sharp-edged, follow your passion, right? And then the second thing is you're building your connections. It's a Robert Waldinger longest standing study on happiness, right? The number one factor to happiness and longevity is the quality of your closest relationships. And I love that that's a main point that you drove home, and taking notes, saying please and thank you. Are these massive things? No, but they have a massive impact. And Maya Angelou, people only remember how you made them feel. So don't be a jerk. So thank you for all that. And one story that comes to mind when I was I guess it was still my freshman year. I mean, you got so vulnerable to us, and I still remember, and I'm thankful for when you and Marika had the whole defensive group over your house. I don't know if that's something you still do, but those experiences shed light on how important culture is to you. Why do you think that's so important to do that? Have us all over your house and do that?
Yeah, totally. I think actually, so one of the greatest, going back to inspiration and stuff like that, and I know you do a lot of reading. I'm sure you read this book, but the Culture Code, Dan Coyle. He talks about trust. The three things he said are the greatest attributes of great organizations or programs are trust, vulnerability, and then having a what's he call it? Having a mission or a goal, or basically going for your
vision.
Goal, vision. And so, that's always been something I try to do. I started that early on in my career as an assistant, just having the entire defensive unit over the house to just, the first time I did it, it was eye-opening, man. I didn't really know what to expect. It was my first year, I think, at Ohio State, actually. So I've been doing it since then.
Wow.
And I had the guys over to my house, and everyone was sharing something that maybe teammates didn't know about them. That was just the overall. That was just the question. Everyone was just sharing something, and we get about a couple people in, and we already had like two people break down in tears in front of teammates that maybe they never would have. And I was like, we're onto something here. Like this is something that's breaking down walls, man. So like that trust and vulnerability just went through the roof right there. You know what I mean? Like these guys are starting to trust their teammates and the coaches and so ever since then I felt it's so important to do that in order to build that trust and vulnerability and culture within the unit and the team. It's just a huge part of it of kind of what I've been doing. And every year it's been a little bit different and has a little bit different feel, and it goes in different directions and things like that. And but it's something that I'll always do. I didn't have an opportunity to do that as much this year with some of the guys based on the shortened season, but I know I encouraged my assistants to do it here, and they did a lot of that. They had like guys over by class and units and things like that. I think it's just so huge to
it's so powerful.
Like you were there once as a 20-year-old, let's say the college kid. You're like, you sometimes you see your coaches as like, hey, this is just my coach, and that's all he does. It's like, yeah, but he's also has a family, and he's got this thing going on, this thing going on, and this thing going on. It's like, okay, like
so important, so important. I was speaking to a team, and I won't say what it is, but by the beginning, I'm cultivating this sharing of information, your story, right? It's so powerful, right? Facts fades, but stories stick. And I at the beginning, I was telling them to tell each other something that they don't know about each other, kind of like you were talking about. And the answers were like, oh, his middle name's this. This is his birthday. I didn't know this, blah, blah, blah. And I said, that's not what I'm looking for, fellas. And it went on, right? And we're doing a full immersion. So now we're deeper than an hour in, and I do it again, right? And one kid, this is the reason why I can't have a script when I go and speak to teams, because one kid raises his hand and he goes, 2 days ago, my parents just got divorced. Boom. Right now, there's a pin drop throughout the entire place, and no one knew that he was going through that. And now it's changed everything, right? The whole aura in the room, the whole culture. Now we're on to something, like you said. You're on to something, right? And there's something really powerful about getting to that vulnerability. I think through the vulnerability, through the communication, you build the trust that Daniel Cole is talking about, and then it makes it more possible to fulfill the vision or mission. So it all is intertwined, like we've been talking about.
100%, man.
The last and final question that I always ask is when you come across greatness, what's your definition of greatness? And out of the great players, student athletes, people that you've been across, what do they all have in common?
I think, and I know this is probably because we've been talking about it a lot, but I think the greatest people that I've been around have that ability that you and I have been talking about to connect with others, I guess, or the people that they are leading or working with or are closest to them, you know. And I think just looking back on my the players that I've had and relationships that I've built, that's probably the number one thing, is the connectivity that they're able to bring with others, you know. To me, that I don't know if that defines greatness, but it will lead to greatness, you know.
Yeah. 100%. I was just reading a book right now. I believe it's called Tribe or Tribes, right? In the idea that you're not just out here to build a team, right? Everybody can join a team. What's a team do? They get some defined goal done, and then they break apart, right? You see teams come and go, right? But if you can build a tribe, that's something they got two things. They have that mission that you were talking about, that shared interest, and open lines of communication, right? So if you have those two things with a never-ending mission, right? It's not just something, oh, when we win the championship or the trophy, it's over, right? You want to cultivate a tribe. So I couldn't agree more that that's such a great definition, because if you understand and come to grasp and carry with you the pursuit of greatness, others will come with you in a tribe like way.
Totally, exactly. And that's through a lot of the things you and I have just been talking about, right? Your vulnerability and your authenticity, and being able to show people who you are, and that you have feelings, and it's okay to have those feelings, you know.
100%. And Coach, I'm so grateful, right? I wouldn't be who I am in terms of a short stick defensive midfielder if it wasn't for you. I wouldn't be the man I am if it wasn't for you, having you as a coach. So I really cherish our relationship, not only from you as a coach, as a mentor, but now a lifelong friend. So thank you so much. Best of luck in the future with Fairfield. I'm sure you're going to do great things there. And thank you so much for our relationship.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, buddy. This was awesome, Mark. Great work with these podcasts, man. Keep it up, and really appreciate you having me on, man.